Well, good morning. Oh, goodness gracious. Many people. Firstly, I also would like to thank the Foundation for inviting me here to speak with you. And also to thank all of the sponsors who make the conference happen. Without our sponsors, it would not be possible, so thank you very much indeed. I teach all over the world, and it's nice to see people smile. I teach a lot in China, and people get very disappointed in China when I turn up, because they see my name, Professor Lee, and they think I'm going to be Chinese, and then they get me. So there we are. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to try and give you some insights into fundraising and fundraising practice. Talk a little bit, as Andre said, about the UK data, although I should be very quick with that because it's not boring, but it's not the most important part in many senses, as I hope you will see. And then really I'm going to talk a little bit about how I engage in fundraising activity. As Andre says, I've been a fundraiser for 30 plus years now, very sadly. Very old and very fat. And fundraising is a fantastic thing because what it enables me to do is it enables me to help other people realize their aspirations. And that's the most important thing about fundraising. It's not actually about giving money. It's about enabling other people to achieve their ideas, their ideals, their concerns. Money is just one measure of how good we are. It's a bit, in England we love the weather, and in fundraising money is like taking the temperature. That's all it is. And there are lots of other measures, so we will talk a bit about some of those. So, we must start. So we will start with some data. This data comes from the Charities Aid Foundation in the UK. You can visit their website. They also have lots of data on European giving and on international giving, and quite a lot of stuff as well to support fundraisers, both certainly in the UK, but also across Europe. And if you have not been there, I suggest that you go there. What this shows, this is data from last year, and this data shows that in the UK, currently, from individuals, we raise approximately £20 billion a year. But that's not all fundraising. That's not all fundraising. Of that figure, at the top at the left there, you'll see donations are 7.2 billion. That's fundraising. Legacies, making a gift in your will as you come to the end of your life, is 2.2 billion. But we also then have fees for services. So these are services that charities, voluntary organizations undertake. And then finally, we have what this data set calls fundraising. Fundraising actually is the first two and the last one. So in this, it's about 13 billion. But there are new figures out just last week, sadly after we wrote this speech, which updates this. And in the UK, fundraising last year from individuals fell from about 13 billion down to 9.6 billion. And I'll explain some of the reasons why that happened in the last 12 months a little bit later on. But if we look at this income, and these really are slides for you to take away and think about afterwards, because they're quite boring and quite busy. But you can see how, rather like in Poland, when I looked at Poland, actually the way in which people participate in non-profit organizations, in NGOs, is very similar in Poland to the UK. It's just that we have more of it, that's all. And actually, what that means is you're in a better position, because you have more potential than we have to grow, which we'll come back and talk about a bit later. And overall, when you look at this, about 40% of the UK population give infrequently, from time to time, to charities and voluntary organizations, make donations. And that figure, despite the drop last year, has remained relatively stable. as we go through periods of economic growth and periods of economic decline. In fact, actually, the research shows that across the globe, actually, the charitable sector, the non-profit sector, does better in periods of austerity. Most people think when times are hard, it will be harder to raise funds. But in both the UK, the American, and the Asian experience, when the economy dips, actually income increases. Why? Because people are much, much more aware of the needs out there in society that are not being met by government or by other sources. So actually the worst time for us are periods in the economic cycle when we're just coming out of recession. Why? Because everybody's too busy making money for themselves. Yeah? So we need to think a bit about where we are in the cycle. But broadly speaking, it's remained stable. And this is a really interesting slide. It's very boring, but it's actually a very interesting slide. Because what it shows me is that in the UK, the individual giving is dominated by no more than 100 very large big brands. And in the UK, we call that a highly stratified sector. 96% of the resources goes to just 4% of the organizations. So brand dominates in terms of volume. But if you look at this slide, what's really interesting is even for the very smallest organizations in the UK, individual giving is as important as it is in the larger ones. And one of the problems we've had in the UK is that these relatively small number of big charities have created a way of thinking about fundraising which reflects really only their way of doing fundraising. And what's interesting about that is it's not the way that raises the most money over a period of time. Which is interesting. Because this shows you not how much people give, but how much people volunteer. And in the UK, volunteering is giving your time to help. The most volunteering in the UK, the top one, the second one, and the third one, all three of them, are actually engaging in fundraising. So most fundraising in the UK is not direct mail, is not face-to-face, I'm very sorry to say, is not telephone fundraising, I'm afraid to say. These are very important things, and we must talk about them later on. But most fundraising is by the individual proactively going out and engaging in an activity, maybe sponsoring a friend or a colleague, or attending an event, or participating in a competition or a raffle. These are the things that most people, most of the time, like to do when engaging in fundraising. And as a fundraiser, I like to know what people like to do. Because research tells us when people do things they like to do, and especially when they raise funds for causes, and they're happy, the thing they most want to do is more of it. And that makes my life even easier as a fundraiser. So, the first thing I would want you to take away from this talk, if you're in a very, very large organization like UNICEF, WWF, or if you're in a very, very, very small organization, is to remember that direct marketing is not fundraising. It's simply a channel, a mechanism. And it's not the channel of choice for most people. It's become the channel of choice for fundraisers. So we just need to think about that and be creative about that. And actually these medium and small sized charities, they don't raise billions of pounds, but by comparison with the large organizations, they raise the same amount of money to enable them to do their work. And that's what this should all be about. So I've given you here some highlights What's also interesting from the new research from this year is that most people, as I said, donate infrequently, which supports my argument. They do it occasionally, about 41%. About 31% of people give regularly on a monthly basis. They use something in the UK, I don't know if it's here in Poland, called a direct debit. They set up a form with their bank and they give a regular amount each month. And only 5% of people give on a weekly basis. So most giving remains what we call ad hoc in the UK. And it's still the case, 55% of people prefer to give by cash. Still the case, 55%. 31% give through their bank. And 26% give through a raffle or a competition. Because people like to participate. They like sometimes to get some benefit back. It's also the case, as this slide shows, it continues to be the case, that women give more than men. That in the main, they like to give to causes such as children, medical research, and the avoidance of medical conditions. These are all very boring. This is very interesting. In the UK in the last 10 years, we've had many people, I go and listen to them at big conferences, mainly from agencies, interestingly. I love agencies, but you must beware sometimes of people from agencies. People from agencies telling me that the world is now completely different because we have social media, and we have digital, and we have this, and we have that. And everything is changed, and everybody must engage in digital fundraising. 10 years ago, digital fundraising delivered 2% of income to the UK charitable sector. Now, it delivers 4%. It takes up at least 60% of every conference I go to. And the first thing these people tell me, these very clever people who are very wizzy and blah, 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 and my daughter, Paris, she understands every word of it. I understand none of it, thank God. Because the second thing that they tell me is that we must raise money from young people. Young people are the future, that's true. But also, all the research tells us that people give according to their, not mine, their lifestyle. That is reflected here in this chart. This is European giving. And this shows us and tells us categorically that the people who give least are the young. That doesn't mean to say they're not motivated. It doesn't mean to say that they're not idealistic. It doesn't mean to say that they're not interested. And of course, some are. But overall, they are not the best target audience for fundraising. By and large, women more than men, older rather than younger. And not surprisingly, because we're talking about discretionary spending, people tend to give more when they have more to give. So the middle class are the most important target audience. Interestingly, however, in England, the poorest give the most as a percentage of their income. Why? Because they see around them every day the causes that they wish to alleviate. So, some important things. This is the European experience, again, from the CAF World Giving Index, and we'll come back to this. You mustn't worry about how busy the slide is. But Poland is here. Here we are. Here's Poland, just here. And we'll come back and talk a bit more about that a bit later on. And what's interesting about this research is it charts by 3 different measures. The first measure is a measure when surveyed of people who said they had helped a stranger. So it's sort of measuring their capacity, their feeling for charity, for helping others. The second measure is giving money. And the third measure is giving time. And we've already seen that most of the time, most people, when they give time, give time to raise money. So this is a good thing. And what's interesting across the whole of the globe at the moment is the people who are doing best are you, the East European states. So this market, the market that you're in at the current time, is the best market in terms of the potential for the development of individual giving.